The evening air was thick with Lagos humidity as Chief Damian Okonkwo stepped out of the tall, glass-paneled skyscraper of Okonkwo Holdings. He waved off his driver, choosing to walk the short distance to his private parking spot, a habit from his younger days, before wealth wrapped itself around his life like golden chains. The city buzzed faintly in the background, okadas roaring, vendors shouting, radios crackling in yellow buses. Damian, a man known for his calculated power and hard-won empire, had just concluded a confidential board meeting about restructuring the company's succession. Unknown to him, Betrayal was already seated at his table, in the form of his half-brother, Philip. As he approached his SUV parked under a lone tree, 3 men in black balaclavas emerged from the shadows. One jabbed a needle into his neck before he could shout. His knees buckled, his world spun, and the last thing he heard was the slam of a trunk. He awoke to the scratch of gravel against his face and the biting cold of early dawn. His head throbbed violently, and his hands were bound. The surrounding air smelled like fish, wet sand, and diesel. He was somewhere behind a market, dumped like a sack of yam. Blood trickled down the side of his face from a gash above his right brow. Disoriented and nauseous, he tried to recall where he was or what had happened, but everything felt blurred, like memories submerged in oil. A small group of early morning sweepers passed him. One pointed and said, "Nah, madman be that." Another shook her head and muttered, "God forbid bad thing." No one stopped. As the sun rose, Damian, once a titan in fine suits, dragged himself into a corner behind a kiosk and fell unconscious again. From the polished boardrooms of Victoria Island to the stinking gutters of a forgotten market, his identity was now just a ghost. Meanwhile, back at the company, Philip was already preparing the public narrative. At 8:03 a.m., the company's media spokesperson released a press statement. Chief Damian Okonkwo has been declared missing. His last known location was near Osborne Road. The family is cooperating with law enforcement. At the press briefing, Philip wept on national TV, his voice trembling as he said, "My brother is a man of peace, of vision. We pray for his safe return." The world watched with sympathy, unaware that the same man crying crocodile tears had orchestrated it all. Shareholders began to panic. Reporters camped outside the Okonkwo mansion. But no one knew that the very man they were searching for was already being passed by daily, dirty, barefoot, and curled up behind a pepper seller's shed. Chinu adjusted the tray of fresh bread on her head and wiped sweat from her brow with the edge of her wrapper. The day had barely begun, but Mama Cootie's bakery was already on her neck for being too slow with morning rounds. She navigated the familiar route through Ijaja Market, calling out, "Hot bread, soft bread." Her voice had a rhythm to it, the kind that sold quickly to early commuters and tired shop owners. As she moved past the fish sellers and yam piles, her eyes fell on the strange man again, the one she had noticed the day before behind a Coca-Cola signboard, sitting like a forgotten object. His beard was wild, his clothes shredded and coated in dust, and his eyes, though tired, held a depth she couldn't look away from. He wasn't begging. He wasn't even speaking. He just sat, watching the world pass. Her heart tugged painfully as she remembered how he had looked at the banana peel yesterday before the lorry tire splashed gutter water on it. She had seen desperation before, the kind where hunger makes a man shake, but this man looked like he was fighting more than hunger. She slowed down and looked around. No one was watching. From beneath her tray, she slipped out a half loaf of bread that had been slightly crushed during delivery. She placed it gently in a torn nylon and walked toward him. "Take," she said quietly. He looked up at her, eyes searching, cautious. Slowly, he took it, nodded once, and devoured it with trembling hands. She didn't wait to watch. She hurried off, heart pounding. That night, she thought about his face. The way he had eaten like he hadn't chewed in days. There was something familiar about him. Not his face, but his silence. The next morning, she did it again. This time, she had saved a fresh piece for him. Again, he said nothing, but his eyes softened with recognition. For the next 5 days, she kept it up. Her salary was small, barely enough to buy Gary and water for her and her younger brother Ikenna. But there was something about this man. Each time she saw him, She felt like she was saving something bigger than she could understand. He never spoke more than a word or two, mostly thank you, in a voice that still carried a strange authority. She noticed he sometimes wrote odd shapes on the ground with his fingers, then wiped them away like he wasn't sure why he was doing it. People ignored him or called him one of those madmen. But not Chinu. She had learned from her late mother that some mad people are just people who've been broken too many times. Deep down, Chinu felt she wasn't just giving bread to a stranger. She was feeding a soul trying to return. On the 7th day of her silent charity, Chinu returned to the bakery to find Mama Kuti waiting like a lioness guarding prey. The bakery owner stood near the oven with her fat arms folded across her chest and her sharp tongue ready. "You think I don't see what you've been doing, Chinu?" she barked. Chinu, tired and sweaty from delivery rounds, wiped her face with her sleeve. "Ma, but Mama Kuti cut her off. Don't mommy. You day give free bread to Madman ABI? Is it your father's bakery? Is it your flour?" Her voice was loud enough that the other workers peeked from behind sacks of flour. Chinu's heart raced. "It's just leftovers, Ma. He's hungry. He never asks." Before she could finish, Mama Kuti slapped a notebook onto the counter. "From today, I will deduct every slice you waste. If you want to be feeding your fellow mad people, feed them from your own pocket." Humiliated and afraid of losing her job, Chinu bit her lip to keep the tears in. Her weekly salary was just 3,500 Nigerian nairas, barely enough to survive. Any deduction meant skipping meals. But when she got home, Ikenna was waiting with his usual cheer. "How market?" he asked, rinsing his face from a basin. She sat quietly. When she explained what happened, Ikenna frowned. "Let them deduct it. I'll make up for it. Let me take more Okada runs this week." Chinu looked at her younger brother, just 21, yet already weathered by life. She had raised him since their father died. They had no one else. "What if I lose the job?" she whispered. Ikenna smiled and replied, "Then we sell Accurate together. But you're not stopping that bread. That man, he needs you more than you need fear." Chinu held his hand tightly. In a world that crushed kindness, her brother's words gave her strength. Determined not to stop, Chinu began a new routine. She hid the bread beneath her wrapper, stuffing it between extra nylons and her hip. If Mama Kuti inspected the tray, she'd find nothing. The man, still unnamed, now looked forward to her arrival. His eyes would search the crowd until he saw her face, and a ghost of a smile would flicker. Chinu didn't know who he was, but she knew that her bread wasn't just bread anymore. It was trust. It was memory. It was hope. Chinu's days began earlier now. Before sunrise, she'd slip into the bakery with the rest of the early shift, collect her delivery tray, and carefully tuck a hidden loaf or two under her wrapper. She had become a master of misdirection, showing only the sellable loaves while keeping the damaged ones to herself. Mama Kuti was too lazy to inspect every nylon bag, and Chinu used that to her advantage. By the time she got to Ijeja Market, she would deliberately pass behind the pepper seller's kiosk, where the strange man now slept every night. The smell of rotting vegetables and stale beer never stopped her. She'd quietly crouch, unwrap the nylon, and hand him the bread. Sometimes she added sachet water if she could afford it. The man had started responding with small nods, a faint thank you, or just long stares. He didn't ask questions, but something in his eyes spoke volumes, a depth of pain she couldn't understand yet couldn't ignore. One afternoon, as she passed him his usual bread, Chinu noticed he was holding a crumpled biscuit wrapper. He stared at it like it was gold, then pressed it to his chest. She crouched beside him that day, just watching. Then he surprised her. He pointed to the wrapper and muttered, "CEO Pack Blue Logo Biscuits Boardroom Snack." Chinu's eyes widened. "You remember this?" she asked gently, trying not to startle him. He looked away, almost ashamed. Then he dipped his finger into the sand and shakily wrote, "OKWNKWO." Chinu froze. That name sounded familiar. Wasn't that the name she saw on a newspaper headline recently? Okonkwo Holdings CEO still missing. Family in despair. She had barely paid attention at the time. It felt like news for rich people, not girls who sold bread. But now it was different. Her heart thudded. What if this man wasn't mad at all? What if he was the same person the whole country was searching for? That night, she couldn't sleep. She told Ikenna everything. The way the man wrote Okonkwo, the biscuit wrapper, the flash of confusion and sadness in his eyes. Ikenna leaned against the wooden wall of their small room and whispered, "What if you're right? What if he's the real Chief Damian?" Chinu shook her head. "Even if he is, who would believe us? Look at him. He smells. He wears torn trousers. People call him mad." But Ikenna wasn't joking. "Then we find a way. But first keep feeding him. Keep watching him. Don't let him slip." Chinu nodded slowly. Something in her had already bonded to the man, not out of pity, but out of purpose. She didn't know how or why, but she was sure of one thing. The man behind the kiosk was not crazy. He was broken. And sometimes broken people don't need saving. They just need someone to remember them. Across town, sleek cars rolled into Okonkwo Holdings headquarters as press cameras clicked nonstop. It had been over 2 weeks since Chief Damian's disappearance, and the board was growing restless. Philip Okonkwo stood at the podium in a tailored navy suit, wearing a mask of sorrow. His voice cracked on cue as he read his statement. "We're doing everything in our power to locate our beloved brother and leader. His vision, his values, his heart, all are irreplaceable." The crowd murmured with sympathy. Investors nodded in sadness. But it was all an act. Behind closed doors, Philip had already begun taking full control, signing new authorizations, replacing old advisors with loyal stooges, and manipulating shareholders into voting him as interim CEO. In hushed corners of the company, whispers grew. Maybe Damian's dead. Some suspected foul play, but with no body and no proof, nothing could be done. Meanwhile, the search had expanded to remote towns and villages. Police posters were plastered everywhere. Missing person, Chief Damian Okonkwo. Last seen in Victoria Island. 5 million Nigerian nairas reward for any valid information. But the man in question had become so unrecognizable that even trained detectives walked past him in Ijeja Market without a second glance. His beard had grown, hair unkempt, eyes sunken. Without his designer suits, wristwatch, or driver, he looked like a beggar who belonged to no one. People called him the madman behind Pepper Seller's shade. Chinu watched this unfold and realized how fragile identity could be. Without his wealth, his voice, his clean clothes, Damian had become invisible. And in that invisibility, he could be destroyed without question. Chinu began collecting newspaper clippings. Each time she saw a headline about Okonkwo Holdings, she tore it out and folded it into the back of her Bible. Ikenna noticed and said, "You're becoming a detective." She smiled faintly. "No, I'm just trying to connect dots." One evening, she placed a page beside the man and asked, "Do you know him?" He looked at the picture, then at her, then whispered, "He took my face." Chinu's blood chilled. She wanted to scream, to report it, to go on TV. But who would believe her? She was a bread seller. A nobody. Worse, she was the same girl Mama Kuti had humiliated for giving bread to a lunatic. She realized that if the truth was going to come out, it had to be done quietly, cleverly, and with proof. "Ikenna," she said the next morning, "we're going to do something crazy, but we'll need a phone." It began with murmurs, the kind that escaped Damian's mouth when he was asleep. Chinu had noticed them. Fragmented phrases, business lingo, numbers. Holdings, merger clause, board vote. Philip, he often gripped his head in pain, rocking slightly as if resisting something inside him. One day, he scribbled shapes in the dirt again, rows of squares with arrows, then scratched it all out. Chinu copied it onto paper and brought it home. Ikenna, always the curious one, said, "This looks like a building layout." Chinu blinked. "A company boardroom," she whispered. It was becoming too consistent. Damian wasn't rambling like a madman. His mind was fighting to remember. They needed to push further. Chinu decided to start conversations with him gently, feeding him while dropping soft questions. "Do you like biscuits?" she'd ask. He'd nod. "Ever worked in an office?" No response. But his grip on the bread would tighten. The truth wasn't far, it was simply trapped behind fog. One afternoon, as Chinu sat with him under the broken umbrella where he now slept, he suddenly turned to her and said clearly, "My brother. Philip. Snake in suit." She gasped. "You remember?" He shut his eyes tight, breathing heavily. I was numbers, blood door locked. He started coughing violently. Chinu held him, panic rising. When he calmed, he whispered, "Don't trust men with soft tongues." It was the clearest he'd ever spoken. Chinu knew what she had to do. She and Ikenna pooled their money, barely enough, and bought a small, second-hand button phone with recording capability. She brought it in her bra the next day, sat with Damian, and began recording their chats subtly. The goal wasn't to interrogate him. The goal was to let his subconscious speak freely, and hopefully it would lead to undeniable evidence. Later that week, Damian whispered something that stopped Chinu's heart. Boardroom password. 3479, #Delta code. He then looked straight into her eyes and said, "Tell him I'm not dead. I remember the way the blood hit the floor, the smell diesel, they threw me away like dust." Chinu's hands trembled as she pressed save on the phone. It was real. He was real. And now they had something solid. But there was a new fear. If Philip found out Damian was still alive and being helped by a poor girl with a phone, he would stop at nothing to silence them. Chinu knew it was no longer just about bread or kindness. It was about survival. And for that, they had to move fast. Philip sat in his glass office, staring at the latest tip from one of his undercover aides. A message blinked on his secure line. Subject seen alive near Ijeja Market. Looks mad. No ID. Being fed regularly by bread girl. Still unrecognizable. He clicked his tongue and leaned back, steepling his fingers. "So he's still breathing," he murmured, a smirk creeping onto his lips. But not for long. Damian's continued existence was a threat that could destroy everything Philip had built since the disappearance. He couldn't kill him openly, too risky. But what if the girl was used? Philip summoned two of his men, Desmond and Cosiso, both former street boys turned mercenaries. He gave them precise instructions. Don't harm her. Just earn her trust. Help her help him, but with a little gift inside the food. A slow, twisted plan was born. They would disguise themselves as NGO workers, men of Compassion Initiative, and approach the bread seller under the pretense of community outreach, praising her charity and offering to sponsor her by giving her free food packs to deliver to the man. The next day, Chinu stood confused as two sharply dressed men approached her during her delivery rounds. "We've been watching your kindness," one of them said, handing her a fake flyer. "God sees your heart, sister," the other added, grinning too widely. "Please let us help you continue the good work." They opened a small box filled with neatly packed stew rice and a wrapped loaf of bread. The packaging looked expensive, something far above her daily means. "Just give this to him today," one said warmly. "You've done so much. Let someone bless you back." Chinu hesitated. Her instincts flared, but their kind smiles and official tone made her feel guilty for doubting them. She thanked them hesitantly, took the food, and tucked it beside her delivery tray. Her heart beat fast. Something didn't sit right, but the idea of getting help after being punished by Mama Kuti for weeks almost made her believe it was real. She said nothing to Ikenna that day, wanting to avoid his usual suspicious nature. But as she walked toward the man's usual sleeping spot near the back of the pepper shed, a speeding Okada came out of nowhere and grazed her leg, knocking the tray from her head. The plastic food pack burst on the pavement. The stew splattered across the hot cement, sizzled, then began to bubble violently like acid on metal. Chinu froze. Her eyes widened in horror. She dropped to her knees and sniffed. A sharp, metallic scent burned her nose. Her brain clicked into science mode. She remembered her chemistry classes, reactions to phosphates, alkaline burns, bubbling due to foreign compounds. This wasn't just food. It was poisoned. She quickly scooped the remaining rice into a nylon, wrapped it tightly, and shoved it into her bag. Her hands shook as she walked home. By the time she reached their one-room apartment, Ikenna took one look at her face and asked, "What happened?" She sat slowly, opened the nylon, and said quietly, "They tried to kill him through me. I almost gave him poison." Ikena's jaw clenched as Chinu finished her story. The stew, the foaming concrete, the fake NGO, and the strange calmness of the men who offered her the food. "They were watching you all along," he said, pacing the room. "They're using your kindness as a weapon." Chinu sat still, her heart pounding, as she relived the moment she almost fed poison to the man who had done nothing but accept her daily bread with silence and dignity. "He trusted me, Ikena," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "If I had given him that food, he'd be dead. And they'd have blamed me." Her voice broke. Ikena sat beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "But you didn't. You saw it. You stopped it. You saved him." Chinu shook her head, still unable to forgive herself. "But for how long can I keep this up? We're poor. I have no money, no power. Mama Kuti is already looking for reasons to sack me. And now men with power want to silence us." The fear in her voice was thick. But Ikena refused to let fear win. "Then we fight smart," he said. "We don't go to the police. They'll laugh at us. But we can gather evidence. If this man is really who we think he is, he's got stories in him. We record them. We build a trail." Chinu nodded slowly. That night, they made a new plan. She would continue feeding Damian. But now, she would ask questions gently. Not like interrogation, but like memory triggers. What did he remember? What names? What words slipped out unconsciously? Ikena would handle the tech. He borrowed an old Nokia phone from a friend and rigged it to record audio for over an hour. Every evening, Chinu would hand it to Damian discreetly during her visit. The man didn't say much at first, just jumbled words. But every now and then, his voice grew clearer, his tone more structured. "Merger. Lagos floor 22. Philip, don't trust him." Chinu didn't interrupt. She just sat with him, fed him, and let his mind do the rest. 2 days later, Damian said something that made her freeze. After finishing his bread, he muttered, "Password, Delta code 3479, safe behind bookshelf." Chinu didn't know what it meant, but she knew it was important. She played the audio for Ikena later, and he blinked. He just gave out a company password. This isn't coincidence anymore. They began documenting everything. Chinu kept a journal. Ikena created backups of the recordings. She no longer cared about Mama Kuti's deductions. She no longer cared that people looked at her strangely for sitting with a madman every day. The truth was bigger than her fears now. She had crossed a line, no longer just a kind bread seller, but the only one who stood between a man's life and the plot to erase him from history. Her hands might have been calloused from lifting bread, but now they carried something heavier. Evidence of betrayal, proof of identity, and the power to bring down a lie. The air was damp and heavy as Chinu sat with Damian under a makeshift tarp they had strung up for him behind the pepper stall. Rain fell in tiny needles that tapped against the zinc roofs. On her lap sat the recording phone, already active. Hidden beneath the wrapper draped across her knees. "Sir," she said gently, offering him his bread. "Do you like the name Damian?" He blinked. Something flickered in his eyes. His fingers trembled as they gripped the loaf. "That name, yes, mine." Chinu's heart jumped. She pressed softly. "Do you know your brother's name?" His hand stiffened. "Philip. Philip. Snake in suit. Took everything." His voice cracked with fury. Chinu nodded slowly. "Tell me what happened." He looked at her now, really looked, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "They wanted to kill me. The car was fake. The driver wore a mask. I fought. Head hit iron. Everything black after that. I woke up here." Chinu tried not to cry. She kept her voice steady. "You're not mad. You're not forgotten. We will find a way to tell the truth." He whispered, "They'll never believe me like this." Chinu replied, "They will. Because they'll hear it from you." She tapped the wrapper. "We're recording everything. Every word you say." He stared at her, confused but moved. "Why would you help me?" Chinu looked down at her hands, the ones that had handed him bread day after day. "Because when the world sees a madman, I saw someone trying to remember. And that is sacred." That night, Chinu and Ikena uploaded the first audio file to a newly created anonymous blog. The file included a muffled voice saying the company's boardroom password, an emotional account of betrayal, and names of board members only someone on the inside could know. They titled it, "The Madman Knows Too Much." The post began to circulate, quietly at first, among internet truth seekers and conspiracy blogs. But by morning, one small online journalist reposted it on Twitter with the caption, "This madman knows more than he should. Is this the missing CO?" The tweet exploded. Over 2,000 retweets in hours. Chinu watched it all unfold from an old techno phone at home, her hands shaking. "It's starting," Ikena said quietly. "People are asking questions." But with attention came danger. Chinu's mind went back to the poisoned food. If Philip's men realized Damian was alive and speaking, they would come again, this time more violently. "We have to hide him," she said. "We need somewhere no one knows." Ikena nodded, already thinking. "I know a mechanic's abandoned shed. No one goes there." That night, as the rain came down hard on the roof of their one-room home, they packed a blanket, a torch, dry Gary, and the phone. It was no longer just about kindness. It was now about protection and survival. The sun had barely risen over Lagos when Chinu, still in her faded wrapper and bathroom slippers, sat hunched on the wooden bench outside their one-room house. In her hands was an old techno phone, its screen cracked but barely functioning. Her thumb hovered over the upload button for what felt like hours. Her heart was beating so loudly she could hear it echo inside her head. Everything was ready. The audio files they had recorded, carefully edited by Ikena to remove background noise and sharpen Damian's voice. The clip was short, just under 2 minutes, but powerful. Damian could be heard speaking through the tremor of confusion, pain, and a fading sense of self. "Philip betrayed me. He took my company. Password is Delta code 3479. The bookshelf behind the office table. The content was raw, unpolished, but real." Chinu knew the moment she pressed upload, their lives would never return to the shadows again. They would be hunted or heard. Either way, there was no turning back. When she finally tapped the screen, a shaky breath escaped her lungs. Ikena leaned over her shoulder, watching as the blog post loaded. "The Madman Knows Too Much," an anonymous recording that might change Nigeria's corporate history. They added no names, no locations, just the recording, the words, and a plea. Listen with your conscience. Share with courage. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then a retweet. Then 5. Then someone commented, "This is fake. Stop spreading lies." But others began listening. A few investigative bloggers reposted it. Then came the viral moment. A mid-tier journalist named Sarah Uemi shared the link with the caption, "Damian Okonkwo has been missing for weeks. This voice sounds like him. What if this isn't a joke?" In less than an hour, it had 3,000 shares. Local radio hosts began referencing it on air. Discussions erupted on Twitter Spaces and WhatsApp groups. What began as a whisper had now become a storm. But storms, Chinu knew, don't come without thunder. By dusk, a dark Jeep without license plates parked a few yards from the bakery. 2 men, tall and silent, stepped out and loitered by the roadside, watching. Mama Cootie noticed them first. "Chinu," she hissed through clenched teeth, "what have you gotten yourself into now?" Chinu pretended not to notice them, but Ikena didn't miss it. When he picked her up later that evening, he whispered, "They're here." That night, they moved Damian to a new hiding place, an old mechanic's shed where Ikena used to sleep during his street hustling days. The place stank of rusted oil and forgotten tools, but it had a lock and no neighbors. As Damian curled up on a foam mattress, eyes distant, Chinu sat beside him with the bread in her hand and whispered, "They've heard you now. Just hold on. We're not done." Inside the cramped mechanic's shed, time slowed to a crawl. The only sounds were from chirping crickets and the distant barking of street dogs. Chinu brought food each day, plain rice, sometimes soaked Gary with sugar, and always bread. Damian had begun to speak more, not in full sentences, but clearer fragments. "My office, glass windows, the board voted without me. Chinu wrote everything down in her battered jotter. Every new word was another brick in the wall of memory he was slowly rebuilding. But it wasn't until the afternoon of the seventh day in hiding that something shifted. A neighbor's generator had overloaded and sparked a fire across the street. Amid the chaos, a young boy had run into the mechanic's shed, holding a small portable TV he had stolen from the scene. "I go sell 'em later," he boasted. But before he left, he turned it on, and in that random stroke of fate, everything changed. The TV came to life with flickers of static before stabilizing into a breaking news bulletin. The segment was about the upcoming shareholder vote at Okonkwo Holdings. A journalist stood outside the company's headquarters. Behind her on a massive banner was a promotional portrait of Chief Damian Okonkwo, regal, confident, and alive. As soon as the image appeared on the screen, Damian jolted. His entire body stiffened. His breathing quickened. Chinu rushed to his side. He pointed at the screen with trembling fingers. That's me, he shouted. His voice cracked like thunder. "That's my face." The boy screamed and fled, TV in hand. Damian stumbled to his feet, frantically running outside, barefoot, wild-eyed. "I'm the one," he shouted into the empty street. "I'm Damian Okonkwo. They took my life. I'm not mad." Neighbors peeked from windows. Some laughed. Others pulled their children back indoors. They all thought he was mad. Chinu ran after him, tears streaming down her face. She wrapped her arms around him, trying to pull him back. "They don't see you yet," she said through sobs. "But I do. I see you." Damian sank to his knees on the dirt road, weeping. The weight of weeks of silence, confusion, and erasure came crashing down in that moment. He had been buried alive, not in soil, but in disbelief. She knelt beside him, hands on his shoulders. "You remembered," she whispered. "That means you're not lost anymore." That night back in the shed, Damian said something for the first time that made Chinu cry anew. "What's your name?" She blinked, stunned. "Chinu," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Thank you, Chinu." From that moment forward, he began speaking with more clarity, slowly, painfully, but truthfully. The fog was lifting, and what lay beneath it was a storm about to change everything. As the news of the viral audio continued to spread and murmurs about Damian's return grew louder, danger began to close in like a noose around Chinu's neck. The men in the unmarked Jeep returned, this time asking questions, first at the bakery, then around the neighborhood. One even bought bread from Mama Kuti and casually asked, "That slim girl way day walkin' near madmen, where she day stay?" Mama Kuti, ever petty and cruel, replied with a hiss, "If she's not at the bakery, she's feeding that her husband behind the market gutter." Chinu didn't wait for things to escalate. That night, she packed a small Gonna-Must-Go bag with spare wrappers, Gary, the phone, and Damian's journal. Ikenna secured the shed by welding an extra metal latch on the inside. "They won't find him," he said firmly. "Not unless we let them." But even in hiding, the emotional toll was becoming unbearable. Damian was remembering more. He could now recite names, board members, meeting dates, and even the serial number on his company's fleet of cars. But with memory came agony. He would sit on the floor, rocking slowly, muttering, "They lied to me. Philip Leet. They took everything, even my name." Chinu tried to be strong, but watching him unravel each time made her feel like she was holding a man who was both healing and falling apart. "I don't know if he'll ever be okay," she confessed to Ikenna one night. Ikenna, ever pragmatic, replied, "He doesn't need to be okay. He just needs to be heard." Chinu nodded. They had to act before Philip silenced everything. So they hatched the next step, arrange a private meeting with someone who had power, a journalist, an editor, a truth-teller. But it had to be someone discreet, someone who wouldn't sell them out. After days of searching and asking around, Ikenna remembered someone, a journalist he had once delivered parcels to during his Okada runs. Her name was Sarayumi. Known for her integrity and independent work, she had once exposed a corrupt politician and survived 2 assassination attempts. Ikenna found her number, called her using a borrowed phone, and whispered, "There's a man here claiming to be Chief Damian, and I believe him." There was silence on the line, then, "Send me proof." They sent the clearest audio file. She listened, then replied with 3 words. Where do I meet him? Chinu and Ikenna looked at each other. The clock was ticking. The truth was waking up. And they were ready. It didn't take long before Mama Cootie's simmering suspicion boiled into violent outrage. She had noticed the changes. Chinu spending more time in corners, whispering on calls, returning late, and avoiding the bakery's main kitchen. The final straw came when 2 strange men in suits came asking questions, and described Chinu as the girl who feeds a certain madman. Mama Cootie's pride was bruised. She had long disliked Chinu's humility. It reminded her too much of the innocence she had long traded for bitterness. She stormed into the bakery the next morning, threw down Chinu's tray, and slapped her so hard the nylon bread loaves bounced off the floor. So now my bakery, you and yous do madness, she screamed, voice echoing through the hot, flour-dusted room. Chinu stood frozen, her cheek stinging, her chest rising and falling with restrained rage. The other workers stood in silence, too afraid to interfere. I no go let you use my name day, follow mad people you pandan. You go explain. Chinu had no energy for tears. She simply picked up her loaves, dusted them off, and walked away without a word. But Mama Cootie wasn't finished. That evening, she arrived at Chinu and Ikenna's compound, dragging 2 uniformed policemen with her. She's hiding something. A madman. Maybe a criminal, she shouted to the landlord and nosy neighbors who had gathered at the gate like vultures. Chinu stood calmly at the threshold of her room, Damian hidden miles away in the mechanic's shed. You can search, officer, she said steadily. There's nothing here. The officers looked around, pots of Gary, folded clothes, nothing unusual. But Mama Cootie wasn't satisfied. She's clever, she hissed. She's hiding him somewhere else. I know it. Chinu turned to the officer and said softly, Is it a crime to feed someone who's hungry? Even if the world calls him mad. The younger policeman hesitated. She get point, madam. Furious and humiliated, Mama Cootie stomped off, vowing to sack Chinu the next day. That night, Chinu sat quietly in the darkroom, staring at the wall. Ikenna sat beside her, his expression unreadable. You knew this would come, he finally said. She nodded. But I didn't think it would feel this lonely. Ikenna placed his palm over hers. You're not alone. We're in this together. Chinu looked at him, eyes filled with quiet fire. They can throw me out. They can call me names. But I won't stop. That man, he could have died nameless, forgotten. But he's someone. I feel it in my bones. Ikenna nodded. Then, let's finish what we started. Sarah Uemi is coming tomorrow. Chinu's eyes widened. Already. She said she wants to see him in person. Hear it herself. No cameras. Just truth. Chinu felt a surge of fear and resolve. Everything was moving faster now. And if they didn't manage the next step right, it could all crumble. But she was ready. Come morning, the world would meet the man she never stopped feeding, and perhaps begin to believe. The sun had barely risen when Chinu and Ikenna arrived at the mechanic shed. The air smelled of oil and damp wood. Inside, Damian sat cross-legged, flipping through a torn Bible he'd found days earlier. His mind, though still fragile, was sharper than ever. Someone's coming today, Chinu said softly. A journalist. She wants to hear your story, but only if you're ready. Damian looked up slowly, eyes searching. Will she believe me? Chinu hesitated. Maybe not, but she'll listen. That seemed to be enough. He nodded. They gave him fresh water to wash his face, combed his hair with an old toothbrush, and wrapped him in a clean shirt Ikenna had borrowed from a neighbor. He looked different, still tired, still bruised by life, but there was dignity again in how he sat upright, how his fingers no longer trembled when he drank water. At noon, Sarah Uemi arrived. She was nothing like they expected. Mid-30s, dark-skinned, natural hair packed into a neat puff, eyes sharp behind round glasses. She wore jeans and a plain blouse, and carried only a small notepad and a recorder. No camera crew. No noise. Just presence. She greeted them warmly and sat on the floor beside Damian without flinching. You believe you're Damian Okonkwo? She asked gently. Damian met her eyes. I don't believe it. I remember it. She nodded. Then tell me everything. For the next hour, the shed was filled with truth, raw, broken, and unfiltered. Damian spoke of the late-night meeting, the ambush, the fight, the blood. He spoke of Philip, of passwords, of documents signed in the dark. He wept when he described waking up behind the market, nameless and covered in flies. Chinu sat in silence the entire time, watching the man she once thought was a lunatic now reclaiming every shattered part of himself. When the interview ended, Sarah sat still for a long time. She didn't speak. Then she stood, walked out, and returned 5 minutes later with a bottle of water. She handed it to Damian and said, "You're not mad. You're just a man who was almost erased." She turned to Chinu. "You saved him." Chinu shook her head. "No. I just gave him bread." Sarah smiled faintly. "And that bread gave him back his name." Before she left, Sarah said, "Give me 24 hours. If what he says checks out, the world will hear it. But until then, keep him hidden. There are people who would rather he stays dead." Chinu and Ikenna nodded. That night, they all sat under the quiet shed, eating soaked gari and groundnuts, the air filled with silent hope. The truth was out. And now it was just a matter of time before it reached the right ears, or the wrong ones. At exactly 7 a.m. the next morning, the world woke up to a headline that shattered Nigeria's digital space. Breaking, missing billionaire CEO might be alive. Shocking details revealed in anonymous interview. The article, posted on Truthline Africa, included snippets from Sarah's exclusive, paraphrase quotes, detailed memory fragments, and confirmation that several boardroom passwords provided by the homeless man matched internal systems at Okonkwo Holdings. In less than 3 hours, it had over 800,000 views. TV stations picked it up. Blogs reposted it. WhatsApp broadcasts flew like wildfire. Twitter exploded with hashtags like hashtag Okonkwo Live and hashtag The Madman Speaks. The story dominated morning radio shows. People were stunned, divided. Some called it the greatest con of the century. Others said it was divine truth. But regardless of belief, one thing was clear. Someone had shaken the ground beneath the Okonkwo empire. At the corporate level, chaos erupted. Philip Okonkwo called an emergency press conference. Dressed in a stiff gray agbada, he looked the part of a grieving brother pushed to the edge. "This is nothing but a coordinated smear campaign," he declared. "AI, mental illness, social media sensationalism. I love my brother. I want him back. But this is a cruel distraction from real work." He offered 10 million Nigerian nairas to anyone who could bring the imposter to justice. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Philip was livid. He screamed at his security team, cursed his lawyer, and demanded a manhunt for the source of the leak. "They want to finish me," he shouted. "Find that bread seller. Find her brother. And if the madman speaks again, silence him." His fear wasn't just about exposure. It was about everything he'd already signed. Millions embezzled. Shares redirected. If Damian returned, all of it would crumble. Meanwhile, Chinu watched the coverage from a corner phone booth. She clutched Ikenna's hand, their palms sweaty. Damian, sitting in a wooden chair behind them, watched himself be called a fraud on national TV. He didn't speak. His face was calm, too calm. Chinu leaned toward him. "Don't let them erase you again." He nodded slowly. "I won't. But if they find me, they'll kill me." Ikenna's jaw tightened. "Then we move again." The pressure was now more than ever. But the world had seen a glimpse of the truth, and that spark could not be undone. The question was, would it be enough before Philip's darkness closed in? Or would they need to risk it all to finish what had begun? Chinu looked at Damian. "We'll protect you, whatever it takes." The days that followed were filled with dread. Chinu could feel it in the air, something cold and heavy creeping into their lives. Even the sky felt darker, like the clouds were listening. She kept Damian hidden in the old mechanic shed, which now doubled as their only safe haven. Ikenna was always on edge, staying awake most nights with a sharpened screwdriver beside him. Every now and then, men would appear at odd corners, not police, but the kind of people who watched with empty eyes. Then came the call. An anonymous voice, calm and emotionless, said, "You're being invited to speak with the Okonkwo board. We want to verify the story. In a private setting. Discreet." The voice claimed to represent the legal department. It was exactly what they had dreamed of, a chance for Damian to speak to the very people who once worshipped him. But something about the timing, the smoothness, made Chinu's stomach churn. Still, the idea of legitimacy was powerful. If Damian could walk into that company and reclaim his voice, his identity, everything would change. Chinu and Ikenna debated long into the night. Damian, now more aware of the risks than ever, remained silent until morning. Then, he simply said, "Let me face them. They need to see me. Even if they don't believe, I need to stand where I once stood." That morning, they dressed him in Ikenna's only iron shirt and borrowed trousers from a neighbor who worked as a clerk. His beard was trimmed with broken scissors, and his hair tied with a simple band. He looked nothing like the man on the billboard, but his eyes, those eyes had returned. Determined. Steady. Chinu and Ikenna stood beside him like bodyguards as they boarded a bus headed for Victoria Island, unaware that behind the smiling receptionist and polished marble floor at Okonkwo Holdings, a dangerous plan was already in motion. As they arrived, security men in suits flanked them. Chinu noticed one had a subtle bulge under his jacket, not visible to ordinary eyes, but unmistakable to anyone who'd grown up on Lego streets. Ikenna caught her eye and nodded subtly. Something wasn't right. The meeting room was on the 13th floor, far from cameras, far from noise. As soon as they entered, the doors shut behind them with a mechanical thud. 3 men were seated inside, none of them board members. And then Philip walked in. No more pretense. He didn't smile. He simply said, "You should have stayed dead, Damian." The air turned to ice. Chinu stepped in front of Damian protectively. Ikenna slowly reached into his pocket, where he'd hidden something under his wrapper, a small body camera, live streaming everything directly to Sarah Uemi's secure app. The trap had been expected. But what Philip didn't know was that they had come prepared. The tension in the boardroom was suffocating. Philip circled the room like a predator, his voice low and dangerous. "You were supposed to be a memory, a framed picture in the hallway. But you just couldn't die quietly, could you?" Damian sat down slowly, too exhausted to match Philip's bravado. "Why?" he asked, voice hoarse. "Why betray me?" Philip paused, then chuckled. "Because I was tired of being the shadow. Tired of being the one who brought you tea in meetings. You thought I was loyal, but I was just waiting. You made the money, but I made the moves. And now, the company is mine." Chinu felt her chest tighten. The arrogance. The cruelty. Philip had truly believed that destroying his brother would erase history. But today, history had a witness. Because hidden under Ikenna's wrapper, strapped tight to his chest, the miniature camera recorded everything. Every word, every confession, every sneer. Outside the building, Sarah Uemi sat in her car with her laptop open. She had been tipped off by Chinu about the invitation. She didn't trust it either, which was why they had set up the real trap, to catch Philip's pride red-handed. As Philip continued to gloat, Sarah's screen lit up with crystal-clear footage. She pressed record and began live-streaming it on her verified Truthline Africa page. Thousands began to tune in, many still unsure if the man speaking was truly Chief Damian. But then came a moment that shattered doubt. Philip, leaning across the table, hissed, "You were never supposed to survive that night. I paid those men well. It was your own damn fault for struggling. I told them to dump your body by the water, but you still crawled out. You were supposed to be dead." Damian looked up slowly. "And you? You were supposed to be my brother." By the time security realized what was happening, it was too late. Police units had already been dispatched to the building, following reports from Truthline Africa. The feed had gone viral. People watched from offices, buses, barbershops, market stalls. The world listened as Philip Okonkwo, interim CEO of one of Nigeria's biggest companies, confessed to attempted murder and corporate theft live on the internet. Security men burst into the room, now flustered, torn between protecting their boss and responding to the noise outside. Chinu stepped back, her fingers clenched. Ikenna stood tall. Damian sat calmly as officers entered and told Philip, "Sir, you're under arrest for attempted murder, obstruction of justice, and criminal impersonation." Philip's face collapsed, not into panic, but into stunned silence. For the first time, he realized he was no longer in control. Chinu looked at Damian. "It's over." Damian didn't reply. He just closed his eyes. Not in defeat, but in relief. The news spread like wildfire. Breaking. Interim CEO of Okonkwo Holdings arrested live on camera. Missing brother found alive. Within hours, every major Nigerian station had aired the footage. Journalists camped outside the police station. Reporters interviewed neighbors, past employees, even Mama Kuti, who claimed to have always known something wasn't right with that man. But the world wasn't listening to her lies anymore. They were focused on the truth, the resurrection of a man everyone thought was dead. Chinu, seated beside Damian in the back of a police van, held his hand gently. "You're going home," she whispered. Finally. Damian didn't speak. His fingers trembled slightly. "Home," he repeated. "I don't even know what that feels like anymore." Chinu squeezed his hand tighter. "Then we'll build a new one." At the company, the board held an emergency session. Sarah Uemi was invited as an official witness. DNA tests were rushed and confirmed. The man who had been labeled a madman weeks ago was, in fact, Chief Damian Okonkwo. Contracts signed by Philip during Damian's absence were frozen. A committee was formed to investigate years of fraud. Most board members, though ashamed, offered public apologies. Damian stood at the company podium days later, in a press suit loaned from the same neighbor who once doubted his story. His voice was steady. "I was left for dead, forgotten. But one woman remembered me, not by name, not by face, but by kindness. Chinu, the girl who fed a stranger, saved more than a life. She saved a legacy." Cameras flashed. Reporters wept. But Chinu stood at the back, arms folded, tears silently falling. She didn't need to be in front. She had always done her work from behind. Later that evening, in the quiet of their old compound, a white Prado Jeep pulled up. A uniformed man stepped out and handed Chinu an envelope. Inside was an official letter, handwritten and embossed. "You are hereby appointed General Manager, Community Projects, Okonkwo Holdings. You believed before the world did. It's time the world believes in you." Chinu sank into a chair, the letter clutched to her chest. Ikenna hooped and ran around the compound shouting, "We don't blow, oh. Chinu. Na management you be now." She laughed through her tears. Not because of the job or the salary or the status, but because for the first time in her life, her kindness had not gone unseen. The girl who gave bread had helped rewrite history. And the man she saved had found not just his name, but his voice. Chinu stood outside the tall glass building she had walked past countless times while selling bread. Only now, she wasn't holding a tray. She was holding a leather folder, dressed in a soft blue blouse and fitted skirt borrowed from one of Damian's assistants. The building looked different now. It no longer towered over her like a reminder of all she didn't have. It felt open, inviting. The receptionist greeted her with a smile, the same one who once turned her away in silence. "Good morning, Ma," she said respectfully. Chinu smiled politely, her nerves tucked beneath her quiet dignity. As she rode the elevator to the top floor, she stared at her reflection in the mirror and whispered, "You are here because you belong here." The elevator doors opened to a boardroom filled with men and women in suits. At the head of the table sat Damian, clean-shaven, regal again, but softer. He stood when he saw her and motioned to the seat beside him. When she sat, the room quieted. "This," Damian began, "is Chinu. Many of you know her as the girl who helped me when I was lost. But she is more than that. She is the reason I am alive. And today, I want to announce her appointment as the General Manager for Community Projects." Some people clapped politely. Others exchanged surprised glances. But no one objected. Chinu looked around and met their gazes without fear. "I am not here because of pity," she said quietly, her voice firm. "I'm here because I did what many wouldn't. I saw a man, not a madman. I believed when no one did. And if this company wants to talk about vision and legacy, then let it begin with kindness. That's the only project I want to manage." The room fell silent for a long beat. Then Damian clapped, slowly, and the entire room followed. That day, Chinu didn't just sit at the table. She owned her seat. Later that evening, a black car pulled up at Mama Cootie's bakery. Chinu stepped out with 2 security escorts behind her. The bakery froze. Mama Cootie dropped her spatula, stunned. Chinu walked up to her former boss and said with no malice, "Good evening, Ma. I came to deliver something." She handed her a copy of Okonkwo Holdings' partnership proposal, a full grant to renovate community bakeries across Lagos, Mama Cootie's bakery included. "You'll get new ovens, better staff pay, and full branding," Chinu explained. "On one condition, you stop deducting people's salaries for being human." Mama Cootie swallowed hard. You did all this?" Chinu smiled gently. "No, I just didn't give up." Then she turned and walked away. No insults. No revenge. Just quiet dignity. Ikenna was waiting by the car, grinning from ear to ear. "General Manager OOO," he teased. She rolled her eyes and entered the car. "Let's go home." But deep in her heart, she knew she was never going back to who she used to be. The press conference was held in the grand courtyard of Okonkwo Holdings, the same place where Damian's portrait had once hung as missing. This time, he stood in front of it, fully restored, with Chinu and Ikenna beside him. Journalists packed the space, flashing cameras, microphones extended. "Today," Damian began, "we're not here to speak of loss, but of resurrection, and the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things." His voice rang with clarity. He told the full story, how he was betrayed, dumped like trash, and forgotten. But he didn't dwell on the pain. He shifted the spotlight. "This is not about me. This is about her," he said, gesturing to Chinu, the girl who sold bread but fed the future. The crowd turned to Chinu, now dressed in a soft cream gown, her natural hair in a puff, glowing with quiet strength. She stepped forward to speak, her hands steady despite the storm of cameras. "I never thought I'd be here," she began. "I was just trying to do what my mother taught me. Feed the hungry, even if you're hungry too. I didn't know I was feeding a billionaire. I just saw a man who needed help. In this world, we're taught to step over people who fall. But what if every fall is a call? What if every madman is a story waiting to be heard?" The crowd went still. Some reporters were teary-eyed. This isn't just about corporate power. It's about human power. The power to see people. The power to act when no one else will. "I didn't save him. He saved himself. I just refused to let him starve." And with that, Chinu bowed slightly and returned to her seat. The entire courtyard rose in applause. The echo of her words would outlive the news cycle. That day, a bread seller became a symbol, not just of kindness, but of strength. Outside the building, a new sculpture stood tall, bronze, beautiful, and deeply symbolic. It depicted a barefoot girl handing a piece of bread to a ragged man seated on a stone. The plaque beneath it read, "Kindness is never wasted, in memory of the girl who fed a nation's conscience." Chinu stared at it silently, tears in her eyes. Damian stood beside her. "This isn't for me," he said. "It's for everyone who thinks they don't matter." Ikenna wrapped an arm around both of them. "We started with Gary and insults," he chuckled. "Now see where we are." Chinu laughed softly, wiping her tears. "We didn't just survive," she whispered. "We transformed." And as the sun dipped behind the Lagos skyline, the girl who once gave bread to a stranger walked into her new future. Head held high, not because of what she gained, but because of what she gave. A legacy that began with love and a loaf. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.